Jonathan, Saul's son and heir to the throne, had been present when David had volunteered to fight the giant. He'd heard David decline the offer of Saul's royal armor, insisting that God himself would be his protection. Had it not been with this same reckless, daring confidence that he, Jonathan, and his bodyguard had attacked the Philistines at Michmash? Jonathan admired David's spirit, and so was thrilled to see him return unscathed. As soon as his father turned from David to attend to other matters, Jonathan took him by the arm and led him out of the tent. "Let's take a stroll," he suggested. David knew full well who this was, since he'd seen him in the court. Now here he was, walking in the company with royalty, dressed in his simple shepherd's rags. David felt awkward. Then Jonathan didn't appear to notice. He was just impressed beyond words with David's display of trust in the Lord. As they wandered off along the hillside, they discussed many things and found in each other kindred spirits. And that was the beginning of an enduring friendship. Since Saul hadn't rewarded David in any way, Jonathan took off his own cloak and threw it over David's shoulders. He buckled his own sword to David's belt. Word of David's achievement had preceded the victorious army as they marched back to Gibeah. David walked with the prince, close behind King Saul. Crowds of people lined the street, clapping and cheering. Gradually, a chant became discernible above the general hubbub. "Saul has killed his thousands, but David 10,000s." The king was not amused. Next day, it was business as usual. The king warming his throne and David plucking the harp. Saul was muttering. Hard to tell if he was talking to himself or praying, but it was clear that his mood was not jovial. Suddenly he jumped to his feet and hurled a javelin at David. Nimble as a deer, David dodged the shaft, which stuck quivering in the wall right above the overturned stool. David stood staring at the king in shock, ready to run should the attack be repeated. The two faced each other wordlessly for a moment. Then Saul turned and walked out, leaving David shaking like a leaf. Next day, both Saul and David were back as though nothing had happened.
"So it seems I am in your debt,"
Saul said, breaking the awkward silence.
"I promised you my daughter in marriage, and my daughter Merab you shall have."
Jonathan was thrilled. "So you're going to be my brother-in-law?" But as time went by, it became increasingly doubtful that the promise would be ever kept. And when the girl was given in marriage to another, the matter was obviously closed. But Saul had a younger daughter, Michal, a beautiful young lady who, it was said, had a serious crush on the dashing young David. Being the youngest, she was spoiled rotten, with a personality to match.
"How would you like another chance to become my son-in-law?"
Saul asked David, thinking that if he married the headstrong Michal, she would seriously clip his wings. "But sir, I'm but a poor man, and the bride price would be more than I could afford."
"Money is not as important to me as putting down those wretched Philistines. How about making the price for marrying my daughter 100 dead Philistines?"
Death certificates had not been invented, and scalps had not yet come into fashion, so they settled on foreskins as proof of death. Perhaps David would be killed while raising the bride price, and the marriage need never even happen. But he wasn't. In fact, he returned ahead of schedule with twice the agreed number. The marriage was celebrated, and to Saul's chagrin, the couple seemed very much in love. Saul's displeasure was further enhanced by the realization that David was popular with everyone, loved by the crowds, adulated by his men, best friends with his son, and adored by his daughter. But the thing that stuck most in the king's throat was the realization that even God loved him. Saul began to hint to his commanders that it would be no bad thing if David met a premature end, killed in battle perhaps. But Jonathan interceded on David's behalf, and the suggestion was forgotten. Yet jealousy continued to gnaw at Saul's heart. And a few weeks later, when David was idly plucking his harp, after returning from leading yet another successful assault on the wretched Philistines, the green-eyed monster broke loose. Grabbing his spear, Saul rushed at the little upstart, intending to pin him to the wall. But once again, David was just too quick for him. He ran home and told his bride about his father-in-law troubles. "Then you must run for your life," Michael said. "Leave immediately. Don't wait till morning." But a peep through the curtains revealed men already watching the house. "Quick! Climb down this rope," Michael urged, dropping a cord from the bedroom window. So David left home to start the life of an outlaw. Scarcely had he gone when there was an urgent banging on the door. "He can't come," she countered the royal summons. "He's not well." That bought her a few minutes. Quickly she laid a dummy on the bed and threw covers over it, leaving some goat's hair showing on the pillow. "We're to carry him to the king in his bed if necessary," the returning soldiers growled, pushing past her.
"Why did you try to deceive me, your own father?"
Saul asked when the deception was reported. "But he threatened me," wailed Michael. You can't stay angry with the youngest daughter in tears. So where was David to turn? He daren't go to his family home in Bethlehem. It was just too obvious. Then he remembered the old prophet who'd anointed him to be king. He found Samuel in Ramah at the school of the prophets named Naoth. To be able to confide in such a man proved an enormous relief to the confused young David. But it wasn't long before word came that a detachment of soldiers had been sighted coming up the hill. Once again, the churning in the pit of the stomach. What hope had an old man and a group of theological students got against armed fighters? But by the time the soldiers reached the hilltop, a spontaneous celebration of worship had broken out amongst the students. Brutality was no match for such joy. The soldiers were caught up in the ecstasy and found themselves flat on the ground. Reinforcements arrived, and then yet more troops, and each time they fell to the ground, overcome by the Spirit of God. Finally, Saul himself graced the hill with his presence, and before they could sing "God Save the King," he'd torn off his royal finery and was prophesying along with the rest of them. This lasted all day and the better part of the night. Long before Saul regained his wits next morning, David was gone. Jonathan was horrified when David told him what had happened. "There's no way my father wants you dead." "If you don't believe me, then you watch how he reacts when you make excuses for my absence at the banquet tomorrow night." "David had family business to attend to," Jonathan explained when his father asked him where he was.
"You stupid good-for-nothing,"
Saul roared, jumping to his feet and spilling his drink. There was shocked silence around the table.
"You are a disgrace to your family. Don't you realize that as long as that man lives, your succession to the throne is in jeopardy? Now bring him to me, for he must die."
Jonathan made the mistake of arguing the point. In a fury, Saul hurled his spear across the table, narrowly missing his son. White with anger, Jonathan got to his feet and walked from the room, slamming the door behind him. He met David outside town. "You were right. I can see clearly now that as the Lord was with my father, so he will be with you." There was a pause before he continued quietly. "I fear that God's purposes for you can only be fulfilled if I am out of the way, dead. I want you to make me a solemn promise," choked Jonathan. "When I and my father are both dead, be kind to my family." They both wept, but David was broken beyond consolation. The two entered into a formal agreement that day, a covenant of kindness, for they each loved each other dearly. Then they called upon God to ratify the covenant. "The Lord is witness between you and me, between your descendants and my descendants forever." Then they parted company, broken-hearted. David made a temporary home in a cave near the community of Adullam, halfway between Gath and his hometown of Bethlehem. He got word to his family to join him there, since they too were in danger. Saul would be bound to harass them as a way to get back at David. So they joined him in the cave. Over the weeks that followed, other refugees wandered into the cave. Outlaws, fugitives, homeless men and women with no place to call home, no cause to live for. At first it was just a trickle, but soon more and more were arriving every day, till the ranks swelled to around 400. There was no way David was going to let them sit around and degenerate into a demoralized group of malcontents, so he began to drill them to become fighters. Soon a sense of purpose and pride transformed them into a disciplined band of warriors. The life of a fugitive, responsible for the well-being of a company of men now numbering over 600, was no walk in the park. Sometimes it all got on top of him. "I'm in distress, O God. My eyes are red with tears, my soul and my body racked with grief," he wrote in his journal. "My strength is draining away. It seems I am the utter contempt of those around me, and even my friends have forgotten me, as though I were dead, like a fragment of pottery thrown aside." One day, just as David was feeling really sorry for himself, into the camp walked Jonathan. How he found him, no one knew, but there he was, large as life and smiling encouragement. Exactly what they said to each other stayed between them, but suffice it to say that David's strength and confidence in God was completely renewed.